Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new interview from MinnMax. MinnMax is a place about games, friends, and getting better. My name is Ben Hansen. Thank you for being here. Thank you for clicking on this. Today's interview is a special one because it's not just an interview with one game developer. It is with two thrown together. We are talking to Sam Barlow, who is the director of Immortality, also obviously worked on Her Story, Telling Lies, Silent Hill Shattered Memories. His first game was called Isle, not to be confused with Black Isle, which is where our other game developer came from, who is Josh Sawyer, who is the game director for Pentiment, also the studio design director for all of Obsidian. Josh also directed Fallout New Vegas, worked on the Pillars of Eternity series. So this interview is all about putting those two minds together to see what they would like to talk about. For a lot of this, I'm just sitting back and hearing two people smarter than me have a conversation. So in this discussion, they talk about the game's development, playing each other's games. They talk about what stands out to each of them. It's fascinating just to hear two talented game designers who've been around for so long, what they notice in these games that maybe the average gamer doesn't. So we hope you enjoy this type of content. We understand that it's a little bit different than most you see out there. The reason that it exists is because of independent games media, because that is what MinnMax is. We are supported by folks on Patreon at patreon.com/MinnMax with two N's. So if you enjoy this format, you want to see more of it, you can go support us there. And also if you go there, you can unlock the bonus podcast feed by supporting us at the $5 tier, or you can unlock the podcast version of this interview, all of our other interviews. It's very convenient right in your favorite podcast app. Also, we should mention that there are some vague spoilers for Pentiment in this discussion. We do have timestamps, so you can dodge that chunk if you would like to. But without further adu, here's Josh and Sam. Josh and Sam, welcome to MinnMax, folks.
Hello.
Hello. Oh, hello. Nice to have you two here together. Every once in a while we like to do here at MinnMax kind of like a developer crossover, group discussion type thing. And so, Sam, no offense, but I don't think this is offensive. You're a talker. You seem like you like getting out there and talking. And if I reached out to you to be like, yeah, who do you want to talk to out of anybody? And you're like, you know what? This Josh Sawyer from Obsidian. I'm kind of curious to talk to them, see what they think. I was a fan of Pentiment. So I'm happy to have all of you together. But how did these connect in your minds? Why Pentiment, Sam, out of any developer in any game?
It was a ton of reasons, right? But to some extent to extract some level of revenge, because there was a point in 2022, like we came out, Immortality came out end of August. And, we're like, we're getting some great reviews. Like, we're going to get battered by Elden Ring and God of War. That's just life. But, some of these narrative things like this, we're in a good position. And then I played Pentiment and I was like, Jesus Christ. Putting this thing out there on Game Pass for everyone to play. Just as all the ballots are closing, just as everyone's like drawing up their end of year lists, I'm like, man, this is good.
It's that recency bias. We timed it just for that.
It's a tricky shot to pull that one, but I mean, joking aside, that was. I don't know if I did a best of list for that year because I guess I was too busy shipping a game to pay too much attention, but. Pentiment was up there, and it was, just such a fun ride. Like I always have, there's no good advice to give people about making successful indie games, but like the template that I think has a really good history is take successful AAA or otherwise genre, remove combat. Right. And you can be like, well, like the guys, some people worked on BioShock and they went and made Gone Home. Right. There's so many great examples of this throughout history. And, it's a very reductive way to look at Pentiment. But, that's my stuff is when you're like, OK, we're going to take this team that, has that pedigree in games where you can rely on the combat and the min-maxing.
Thank you.
Unintended. Yep. When I played Elden Ring at the start of 2022, and we were like preparing Immortality to ship, I made some plea that was, you're all enjoying how obscure and not going out of its way to help the player Elden Ring is, right? You're loving the fact that you have to grind for 30 hours to uncover some obscure piece of lore. just remember that when our game comes out. But, you know, the comeback is always like, well, yeah, but for from the gamer perspective, yes, they're grinding for 30 hours to find some obscure piece of lore or track down some quest line, but they have a sword and they're getting to hit things, right? And in their mind, like, that is more of a productive thing. So yeah, Pentiment was, you know, and I love specificity. I think that's the one thing I crave the most out of games. And I feel like now with, like, you know, big mushy open world games, you know, just like the sense of those games gets a bit mushy, and oftentimes, you know, settings and characters and stories in games can sometimes be a little bit more generic. But like the specificity of Pentiment was just, you know, that was 100% my shit. And it did, you know, when I did Her Story, I was fascinated with detective stories, murder mysteries, the conventions of that genre, how it's evolved over time. So, you know, as soon as I started playing Pentiment, I was like, okay, this is going to be my thing. This is going to be cool. And then, like, we had just come out of, like, 1/3 of Immortality is based on an infamous 18th century novel that is in theory set in a monastery. But it was written by an 18-year-old English guy who had never been to Madrid and was writing about monks in Spain, right? So it's not as well researched and as accurate as Pentiment, but there was like a couple of crossovers that, like, I think that the nuns in our story are the Order of St. Clair, and so I'm, you know, playing Pentiment, I'm like, oh, there's like little, you know, it's a very different take, but you know, I still hadn't had enough monks and nuns, so I was glad to kind of absorb that.
Can never get enough.
Yeah, Josh, do you feel like there's a lot of overlap between your games?
Yeah, I was, so I didn't get around to playing Immortality until a few weeks ago. And when I played it, because a lot of people had said they feel sort of like spiritual companions in some way. Yeah. And I was like, on the surface, I don't really get it. But the more I played it, I was like, oh, yeah, like I am seeing a lot of like kind of overlap and connective tissue. And yeah, especially the Italian movie about the nuns and the monks, I thought was really nice. Yeah, I think, you know, they're very different styles of games, but I think that, you know, we're both trying to push boundaries of where can a narrative game go and what can you do with it, and kind of taking risks on certain things. So yeah, once I played it, I was like, yeah, I can actually see a lot of the things that people were sort of connecting between these, which I thought was really cool.
The thing that never stopped being funny to me was the fanboys. And I didn't realize like the console wars was still as big a deal. Kind of feels like it's been reunited by this generation. But
going on in the background.
Yeah, but Immortality came out, Pentiment came out, and there was this whole wave that suddenly was in my mentions of people being like, that's the Xbox quality. That's the Game Pass difference. Look at these games. Look at their Metacritics. These are the games of the year. And they were like holding up Immortality and Pentiment. And I was like, these are not the games you think they are. Like I agree, but you know, this is, you know, these are not your Halos or whatever. Like this is not your, you know, your big standard game. But it was cool that these people were then going out of the way to go play them to show their solidarity with the
fodder.
The Xbox
love being
Cross.
Fodder in the console wars.
Yeah.
Well, it is. I mean, we don't have to dive into the business of it. Maybe the least interesting part for having a couple designers here, but it is interesting that, like, I guess, you know, Microsoft's in the interest of turning heads for Game Pass, of showing 5 seconds of a game, people being like, what is that? I guess I need to check it out on Game Pass. I feel like both your games definitely hit their criteria of like, if you see that in any sort of montage, it is like a, wait, what is available on Game Pass? Like, I need to check this thing out. And so you both fill that, you check that box, but also it's nice to have both your games, which in very different ways, they both feel like, oh, these are games for adults. And the fact that they both succeeded so wildly is just, it feels comforting and reassuring. We can all be smarter with games like your games is out there, I guess is where I'm going with it.
Well, I think that the platform is kind of designed to allow smaller and more experimental games and more esoteric or niche games to kind of have a home. And in much the same, and I know maybe I shouldn't even say this because they hate the comparison, but like, if you think of a subscription-based TV service, you know, where you subscribe and you have a huge list of things to look at, and you're kind of like, I normally wouldn't watch this movie, but I like Paul Newman, and let me see, let me give it 15 minutes, and they jump in it, and that is honestly what a lot of people do on Game Pass. And for Pentiment, I mean, my view was always, I know a bunch of people will be like, that looks interesting, and then they'll start playing and be like, no VO and a lot of reading, no thank you, and that's okay. Because especially if you're playing it on Game Pass, you didn't actually invest anything other than those 15 minutes in it. But then there's an audience of people who are super into that type of storytelling and historical stuff, and great. So take it away.
Hard thing with those people is like the people that discover it and had no idea going in, right? Then they're like, oh, I'm just noodling around. What is this? They play it and they finish it and they're like, this was so cool. Tell me about the other games that are just like this. And you're like, well,
not really.
Yeah. I mean, you're saying like the business side of it is least interesting, but I don't know. I mean, maybe, I don't know if it's the same for you, Josh, but, you know, because it's my company and like as an indie dev, you're kind of embroiled in the logistics of making things. Like, if I look back at all the interesting creative decisions I've ever made, 99% of them were tied very much into like the business case and whatever was happening in tech, right? Like whether that was, you know, the App Store existing, Steam opening things up, whether that was back when I was on Silent Hill, like the Wii suddenly introducing new people to gaming, like all, you know, there's these very kind of stark circumstances. So it's definitely, and I saw that like a lot of the coverage, because you were like a poster child for Game Pass and Microsoft, Josh, a lot of the people were like, oh, in what way is this like game only possible on Game Pass, right? Or, but I would be interested, like the conception of this game, because certainly when we were starting out on Immortality, a thing I wanted to do, again, like specificity is a thing that I miss in a lot of games, but also, and like you know, this is directly in Immortality, but like growing up, I was really into art and books and film, but like with the film side of things, as a teenager, like my big inspirations were all, it's like the group of British directors that I've subsequently learned is now known as the Brit Pervs, which is slightly reductive, but it was like Nick Rogue, Ken Russell, Derek Jarman, bleeding into people like Adrian Lyne. But when I look at their movies, like they're not, especially someone like Ken Russell, like, you know, they're not all perfect 10 out of 10 movies. But I love the level of exuberance. There's like a fine line between indulgence, which was, you know, a criticism often leveled at some of those directors, and just like going for it, like just really pushing something to a level where you just kind of caught up in it. And certainly with Immortality, like the line I was aware I was trying to tread was, to what extent is this self-indulgent versus like exuberant and like generous to the audience? Like we're gonna go all the way over here and do a bunch of these things that I know are in my head delighting me. And you know, that's, you know, so yeah, with Pentiment, what was that spark, and at what point were you like, I fully down to just commit to everything that makes Pentiment so specific and interesting?
Yeah, first I want to say, would it be incorrect to see a little bit of the devils in Ambrosio?
A little bit. Like one of the hardest things for me is like I love the devils, and early on we were talking like the Ambrosio movie was the one we kind of went back and forth on the most, because at one point we're like, oh, it'd be kind of cool if it was black and white. Does that create too much of a difference between the other movies? Can we figure this out in the timeline? But the biggest decision we committed to was, like, I love the devils. That's like in my top whatever. We can't make as good a movie as the devils. Like, this in the story is supposed to be a kind of Preminger Hitchcock type director who's on, like, in the decline of their career. Yeah. Like, a new wave is coming, things are changing, and they still have one foot in the studio system. So you think of like late period Hitchcock, like Frenzy, even like Marnie, I'm less of a fan of. So this was supposed to be like not a completely successful movie, right? Like this wasn't, if Sam Barlow was adapting the monk, I would totally do the Devil's version, right? That Derek Jarman set design, just like some of the contemporary touches in that, like, are just fantastic. But we kind of talked that through, and I was like, no, we have to actually commit to this being kind of authentic. So there was definitely, there's like, we watched the Devils with the team. It was a first watch for some of them. Definitely there's elements of that in there, and like the Devils is retelling. There's a lot of those stories about monasteries and nuns and things that are based on a lot of the same inspiration, right? It's all kind of
it's like a lot of Boccaccio, Decameron stuff, and like a lot of those stories. But as far as Pentiment, it was pretty quickly so I was really burned out after Deadfire, Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. I started my career with Icewind Dale, which came out in 2000, and I loved playing D&D tabletop. I loved that I was thrilled, overjoyed to be able to work on a D&D game, party-based, top-down, very traditional fantasy. And then we kickstarted Pillars, and that worked out pretty well and was quite successful, critically and financially. I mean, not like burning down the house, but like it did well. And so we're like, okay, let's make the follow-up. And it did well critically again, but it did not do well financially. And there's lots of theories about why. But it was really disheartening because there was a lot of burnout at the end of that project. And at that point in time, it was like between the Icewind Dale games, Neverwinter Nights 2, which is not quite the same, but largely the same in terms of overall style. And then these two games, I was really, really burned out on that style of fantasy and that type of gameplay. And as you said, like so much, like as much as I wanted to focus on narrative stuff, I don't think I did a great job in my role as narrative lead on that project. And I'm not going to blame this on the fact that there were a million other things to keep track of, but it's a whole role-playing game. So there's all the stats and classes and combat and everything. And obviously I had other people to help me with that stuff, but I was still driving a lot of it. And it was just exhausting, and it was very demoralizing. And for a while, I didn't want to direct anything. And so I was just kind of helping around at the studio because I'm the studio design director. And then when Microsoft was acquiring us, I had this kind of idea about a Night in the Woods-ish view game with the art style that would eventually become Pentiments, but I did not think that that was a game that we would actually do in any world, because I wasn't even sure we could really kickstart it or do any sort of crowdfunding for it. But then when Microsoft was going to acquire us and they were talking about Game Pass a lot, I was like, all right. And so I went to my boss and I was like, I want to do this. I want to do it. It's going to be small. I mean, because the thing is, when you talk about indie, and I try to correct whenever people are like, oh, yeah, Pentiment, it's an indie game. No. It's made under one of the biggest software companies in the world, under this aegis of Microsoft and Xbox.
There's definitely, like, as well, there's, like, I really appreciated, I don't want to disrupt you, but, like, there are moments where you've spent some money. Right, like when I'm playing the game and there's like a special custom animation or there's a bit or just like the sense where you keep introducing, like it hits a point where it could become quite systemic, especially when you're like, oh, this is a game where I'm replaying different time periods in the same location. You're like, oh, that's a thing that could get repetitive, but you keep injecting, here's a new location, here's a new little thing. Like there's just, like you say, this, I really appreciated the points where it actually felt, I'm not going to say expensive, right, relatively, but like there were points where I'm like, okay,
yeah, there were places where
you're treating me to this little bit,
yeah, and it was, basically, I would say I committed to the bit right away because I told Fergus, my boss, I said like, I gotta do this. Like I'm so burned out, I don't want to do anything until I can do this. And I told him, I said, look, it's going to be a small team. I said a dozen. It turned out to be 13. It was a little over budget in the end, but it's a little over budget in the scheme of a huge organization. And to their credit, Xbox right away, they're like, okay, so this is an art game. So we don't really care about I mean, maybe I'll get in trouble for saying this, but they didn't really care about it making money. They were like, yeah, like make it the way you want to make it. And looks great. Keep going. And the next time we showed it to them, they're like, great. Can't wait to see it ship. And they did care about when it shipped, and that was some pressure. And then, I think because I've been in the industry for 24 years this month, which is crazy. I knew, I was a little sensible. Like, I dreamed big in terms of style and stylistic choices and, sort of that, like the joy of writing. But then I'm like, okay, look, how much can we really spend on fonts? How much time and resources can we really spend on the rendering features? And, those were sort of overspends relative to other things. Same with some of the musical choices. We got Lingua Ignota, Kristen Hayter to do the exit track, and that was a splurge, but like, I'm so glad that we did it. And yeah, I think if I could not handle running a company. I would be bad at it and lose my mind. Like I couldn't do it. And so I'm very glad that I was able to make it in this environment with the support of the company around me and the infrastructure that we have, and with the support of Microsoft. But I made it pretty clear from the beginning, like, I'm going to fully commit to the vibe on this. And it's not meant to be intentionally exclusionary, but I know that some people are just going to bounce off of it, and that's okay. Like, we will do our best to accommodate people who, again, like a lot of the things like the glossaries and things like that, where you're like, I don't know what the Deed of Worms is. I don't know what the Council of Constance was, or I don't actually really know that much about Martin Luther, or whatever that is. We do our best to try to bring people in if they're not familiar with those things. But it's like, if you're into the idea of this game, come along with us. And if you're not, that's okay. Like, you can just not play it. There are so many games that you can play. You don't got to play this one.
Do you feel like focusing on and having that smaller team let you focus on the story that much more? Did it feel night and day of like, okay, I can burn so many more calories just on structure and specific writing that it's really paid off?
Yes, it was that, and also a lot of other decisions about mechanics where I basically said there are light RPG elements, but they're really light in terms of statistics and things like that. Andreas has backgrounds, but those backgrounds are, essentially just Boolean checks like, do you have the Latinist background? Yes or no. There's no levels to it. You don't level up. There's nothing like that. There's no combat. The mechanics are walking around, talking, and mini games. And I mean, I looked at a lot of narrative games that were successful, and I'm like, the thing people like here is the art, the style, the story that's being told, the characters especially. And mechanically, what I picked up on is, I think I just want to introduce enough custom little things to keep the player from becoming completely bored. Like, to Sam's point, if you really were literally just walking around and talking to everyone, I think that probably would have gotten very tiresome. And even something as simple as like breaking sticks for the widow or cutting out Christmas cookies is a unique little treat that you get. And, it's some art assets, it's a little bit of audio, it's some custom programming. But, again, I've made a lot of games, and the people I worked with, most of them were quite experienced. And so we tried to be very sober about approaching things, even within the, like, I really want to do this. I love Name of the Rose, and I always love the lemon juice and the, like, holding a piece of parchment over the candle. And so I was like, we got to put a mini game in for that. So Brother Guy had the secret note with the ledger. And, they're just things like that where it's cool, it's fun, it's immersive. It's neat to see that sort of realized within the game, but it's not super expensive. And anytime it looked really expensive, again, the people working with me were very quick and smart to say like, hey man, I don't think this is going to do it. Like, can we do the thing you're trying to do in some other way? And I'd kind of, go like, meh, and like have a little fit, and then come back and go like, okay, but like, this is really what I need. Like, this is what I need to convey. This is what I need the experience to be. So do you got another way to do that? And they always came back with a better idea. So that was kind of what the experience was like. It was just allowed me to focus a lot more on the story and the character development and reviewing other writers' works and things like that.
Did it work for you at the end of this project? Are you burned out just to a lesser degree? Do you feel like this is the way to keep, legendary game designers like you in the industry, is just to have them all scale back and create a smaller, more focused project?
I don't know if it's about the scope. I think it's that I just unreservedly loved everything that we did in it. I think that if, obviously the bigger, we all know this, but the bigger the games get and the bigger the staffs get, the harder it is to get everyone on board with the vision. The more money is involved, the more stakeholders and all, getting tired even saying this stuff. But there are compromises there. But I think that if you're, I think with Deadfire, I realized too late that I was getting just really exhausted of working on that type of game and that type of genre, which isn't to say I don't like it. It's just, I think you can only work in a space for so long before you kind of start to get a little tired. And, there's a line in Pentiment that Krause says, which is me saying, love is the only reason to do anything in this world. Like anything creative, anything at all. And obviously not everyone has the luxury to do that, but that is what brought me back. I don't think it was specifically it's a small team, right. Specifically whatever. It's just, I was super into it. I got a group of people that were on board with it. I will say not everyone on the game is the biggest fan of the subject matter or even this style of game, but I was able to get them jazzed enough to work with me on it and be excited about their part in it. And I think that's really what kind of brought me back from the brink of just being I don't want to direct anymore. Games
is such a screwed up creative industry, just generally, right? Whenever I intersect and spend a bit of time in the film world, obviously that world has huge problems of its own. But I'm always this is such a good setup. You have these development periods and then you all get together as a fun team and you make a movie and it's like an summer camp and everyone makes new friends and then you stop, and then you have a little break, and obviously there's job security and all sorts of other questions around this format, but there's this real nice kind of cyclical thing, and they have these nice pauses, whereas sometimes games, it's just constant, right? And on top of that, you have office politics, because it's tens of people in an office doing stuff at the same time as it is this marvelous creative thing. So yeah, having the ability to pop into something that feels a bit different and can kind of get you excited again.
Well, how do you do that in the game industry? How do you create that full start and stop? Is it just a matter of not worrying about DLC as much, or how do you create more of that kind of film industry rejuvenation period?
I have no idea. So the thing I've done, which maybe is scalable, maybe isn't, and maybe it's a luxury I've now afforded myself as an indie, but the thing that did burn me out, it's interesting that before I went indie, I worked on, I was director on this Legacy of Kain game for 3 years, which was a big thing, and it was very painful, and they canceled it after 3 years. That's kind of part of the inspiration for Immortality. There's a thread through Immortality of it's hard making creative things, and in spoilers, in Immortality, there is a lot of failure, and they're not making the best movies, and they do not achieve their goal to make this perfect movie, which communicates something. And one of the things that killed me on that game was I'd come off when we did Silent Hill Shattered Memories, because there was all sorts of contractual nonsense going on. We didn't have a deal. There was a period of 6 months where we didn't have a team on it because we weren't getting paid, but I was kind of nominally on it. So I had this 6-month run where I designed the whole game on paper, thought about it as hard as I could, justified all these decisions, had things thought out, so that when we brought the team on, it was the equivalent to having in a movie you have a screenplay, right? And a screenplay is a wonderful thing because you can, in an ideal world, you can have a single writer sit in a room for a couple of years, just obsessively thinking about every angle on this movie, and then they end up with a document that is a pretty good blueprint for the movie, and then everyone else can come in and you can kind of have a good guess at how much it's going to cost. When the art director comes on, they can read the screenplay and be like, oh, I get what's happening with this movie, and let's talk about this thread running through it, or these themes. I have these ideas. when we did Legacy of Kain, this was much more similar to how most kind of AAA games work, in that the game got signed off of like a 1-page, maybe it was a 10-page pitch we'd done, where it was like, oh, this is the idea, this is the character, this is the gameplay. And then immediately we started ramping up the team. And so, at some point you had teams of people animating things, creating combat systems, doing level designs, mounds of concept art, like all this stuff was happening. At the same time, me and the other writer were trying to figure out what the story was, right? And it was like so inefficient. And, and you hear stories of, like, one of the things that was apparent to me at that point was, like, if you wanted to make a game where the story was integral, where the game mechanics reflected the story, at that point, maybe it's still the case, you had to be like a writer-director. You had to be a Kojima or a Ken Levine, because only if you were the boss and the writer would you be allowed to make decisions, right? But then you hear about stuff of, like, getting halfway through BioShock Infinite, and then, Ken Levine realizes, oh crap, this story beat doesn't work. Throw out this entire level, right? And all this money, and it's horrific. So when I went indie and it was just me making her story, the big luxury I gave myself was, I'm going to spend half of my dev time thinking about the game on paper, planning, researching all these ideas, like laying out before I start getting distracted with game engines and all these other things. And it's the really hard thing with games is, if you went to someone and said, cool, you've just signed this new video game, give me a year or 2 years just to get my thoughts on paper, they'd be like, F off, because we know it's going to take 3 to 5 years after that to build the thing, right? And we need to realize some revenue for our investors here. And so no one is ever going to do that. And we don't have a marketplace for screenplays in the same way that movies do, right? So, I've with my indie stuff carved out this world where I get to spend more time thinking and on the structure and on the story and on these things. And obviously I've moved myself into a niche with the last few games where that is even more pronounced, right? Like with Immortality, it's like a team of 3 people prototyping stuff, planning. We brought some extra writers in, a few other people, and then we're going to shoot for 3 months. And now we have 100 people running around, like making pretend movies, right? So there's this ridiculously disproportionate spend on the content, which normally would get more spread out. But, I think, of course, giving people more time to think about things is a good thing. And it's usually not the case in video games.
Yeah, I think that in my experience, I've always worked at, not that I've worked at that many studios, but I worked at Black Isle, which was always a multi-project studio. Then I was at Midway San Diego briefly, where it was everyone on one team on one project, which is a little weird. And then Obsidian, we've always been a multi-project studio. And I think, that, like when an industry like film and not like I'm that well versed, but I have friends in the film industry. But that sense of like, yay, we all come together and do something, and then we go apart and we may see each other later. But like within a studio, if a project ships, you have 100 people, let's say it's a 100-person project, unless you're laying them off, you have 100 people saying like, what are we doing now? And that's that's a logistical issue. It causes a bunch of like anxiety and crazy stuff, because you're like, you're trying to get things moving, but you're also trying to figure things out. And, the scenario that Sam described of like, here's a bunch of people going on the project. And you're like, we don't even know, hold on. Like, we don't even know what the scope of the story is or like the game or anything. And that's really anxiety inducing. And it's really inefficient, because people are like, I'm making stuff, boss. Like, I'm doing things, like I'm trying to be productive, but they're doing it without a foundation, without direction. People are not seeing things with the same eye, and it can be really frustrating and wasteful. But that is kind of how the industry works, unfortunately. Is
the secret then to just have you stewing on an idea like Pentiment for years, so you can kind of work out some of the structure and the beats in your head, so you can kind of hit the ground running a little bit more?
Well, I would say that, Pentiment did get a longer pre-production than, well, maybe not usual. It got a really healthy pre-production. And that pre-production was scoped very carefully. Again, like I had a team of like 5 people, I think, for about the first 9 months. And we scoped it very carefully, and we were very careful to say, this is what we're doing and this is what we're not doing. This is what we're proving. This is what we're ignoring right now. And it allowed us to present something that was pretty close, really, in many ways, to what the game shipped as. And it cut out a lot of the BS of like doing stuff that's not important or focusing on the wrong things. And what was great is when people played it, they really had one on the team. Everyone was like, oh, okay, now I understand the game that we're making. Like, I see it, I understand it. When we showed it to people off the team, they also said, oh, wow, cool. Like, I didn't really understand when you described it.
Right.
It's so much easier to show it and then say, by the way, this is what this game is, than to describe it. And people are like, this doesn't sound like a game I'm going to be interested in. But that pre-production, and I was very insistent. I'm like, not that people were being thrown at me, but I said, like, do not put more people on my project. I don't need them. Not only do I not need them, I can't use them. I can't manage them.
Right.
I need just these people to figure out these key things. And then once we had that foundation, it was much, much easier to bring additional people on. You know, I had written the first, I think, 20,000 words of dialogue, and that was a nice foundation, variety of characters, sense of humor and seriousness and tone. And so then when Kate Dollarhide came in, she was able to, and I had worked with Kate a lot. So again, working with people that I already have good working relationships with goes a long way. And yeah, that really made a huge difference. But yeah, I mean, I've been in all sorts of crazy development environments. New Vegas was made in 18 months, and we just literally had to hit the ground running and just start making things. And, you know, I felt like some days I was just like, go, you know, just like, go, 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 just yelling. I'm like, I'll check in with you in 2 weeks. And I'd come back and I'm like, well, we can't use this, cut it. But it, you know, it was so haphazard. It was so chaotic, and everyone did a fantastic job, but the circumstances were really stressful.
Just for you talking about development in this pre-pro, it's like, as somebody that, got somewhat obsessed with the changing shape of detective stories and murder mysteries, and just the extent to which they have evolved with the public's tastes and the sophistication of the public. Like, I detected a thread, so this is big spoilers. Like, around the same time as I played Pentiment, I watched Bodies, 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 which, and then I think on Twitter I mentioned to you, like, I asked if you'd watched The Draftsman's Contract. I think you said you had, but not like during the gestation and everything.
Yeah.
And they all roughly fit into a genre that, for me, is like one of these kind of later evolved versions of the murder mystery, where the solution is to kind of, well, partly to be like, doesn't really matter who the killer was, right? This is not a puzzle with a beautiful Poirot solution, but also like, to be reductive, like the murderer is society, right? It's like, it's the circumstances, right? Bodies, bodies, bodies. I'm spoiling everything for everybody here now. Like the you know, the reveal at the end of Bodies, Bodies, Bodies is that, like, there isn't like a psychotic slasher murderer running around. The killer was essentially the circumstances of all these people being awful millennials or whatever. There was a British film that came out quite recently as well called like All My Friends Hate Me. Very similar. That was like a kind of remote mansion set up, similar kind of reveal at the end. But you know, that, at what point in the development of Pentiment was that idea and that structure of like, this is going to be presented in the first act as, or chapter, I can't remember what they're called, as like a murder mystery, right? We're going to set up a very conventionally, like, here is the victim, they're at the top of the social pyramid, we're going to be introduced to them, see some of the shenanigans, then we're going to be investigating. And then obviously it goes places, and there is kind of an implicit thing of the game being like, don't worry, like, this isn't the kind of game where you have to get it right and we're going to tell you if you got it right, which, because there are like detective games that give you freedom to make choices, but at some point will tell you if you did things correctly. And then like the ultimate reveal of like who has been behind this all this time, again, it's like it's the real murderer is tied into all the general societal forces that are going on here, right? And they've been manipulated and everything. So like, yeah, what point was that where you're like, okay, this is the thing we're going to try and pull off in this game?
I think that the decision to not give the player the real killer, it actually, this is so reactionary. It was like, we actually, geez, how can I tell this story without, oh, whatever. A developer years ago came to Obsidian to pitch us on co-debbing a murder mystery, and it was going to be a really big deal and a like really big budget, and it was like really conventional. It was just like really, really, really conventional. And I was like, I don't know. I'm not really hearing a lot here that's making me think this needs to be interactive. And then it made me think like, well, you know, I think in an RPG, what I would want to do is I would want to present it and just be like, who knows? What a mystery. And let you sort of play with that. And I had that in the back of my mind, but I hadn't connected it to like this specific idea. But then once we started working on it, I was like, you know, there were a couple things. One, I liked that idea of ambiguity where it's the 16th century. Forensics don't exist. There aren't detectives. Like, good luck. And being under pressure and having a lot of imperfect understanding of things. And just saying, yeah, you've been put in a really miserable position, and you just kind of have to make the best of it and accept that you're responsible for something bad, but you're preventing something else bad from happening. And sometimes that's just how it is. I think I actually also got a little bit of inspiration from one of the reference books for the game is a book called The Faithful Executioner by Joel F. Harrington. And it's about the diary of it's about a historical executioner in Nuremberg. He was the city executioner. And his father was forced into being an executioner. It's very crazy. So
someone's going to do it, right?
The brief story is his father was a respected like woodsman, like a regular old normal guy, and there was a little rebellion in the town. I think it was in Hof, Bavaria, and the Baron, I can't remember, or some minor noble who ruled over the area came with his soldiers and was like, okay, what's up? Who's leading this? And there were these three guys, and he's like, all right, well, you're rebelling, so you're going to die. Executioner. And everyone's like, there's no regional executioner, so like you can't do it. So the Baron said, you, and he pointed to Franz Schmidt's father, whose name I can't remember, but he said, you're my executioner now. And the guy was like, no, like, please, like, I don't know, because it was like a curse of it. Like, it's an awful thing. It's a very low, like, people really disrespect you in society. And he said, if you don't do it, I'll pick the next guy and you'll go on the block too.
Oof.
And so he's like, okay, but then his family, he had to remain an executioner. And it became, and it was like this awful thing. And then his son, because social mobility is not too great, his son was forced into it. And Franz Schmidt, who wrote the diary that the book is based on, his goal, his lifelong goal, was to restore honor to his family and become a citizen of Nuremberg, an actual citizen, not just a guy, but like a real citizen. But it was like, and so he was like, I'm going to be the best executioner that I can possibly be, because most were not honorable dudes. But it was this weird thing where he was forced into an awful situation, and he's like, okay, here I am. I'm going to try to get my way out of this. I know the only way out is by doing this awful thing in the best way that I possibly can. But in Andreas's case, I'm like, I'm forced into an awful situation. I don't know what I'm doing. No one else is willing to help me. So I'm just going to do the best I can. And there's going to be a lot of collateral damage.
Yeah. Sam, do you feel like you could give up the eureka moments in your games? Do you feel like that's so powerful? That's kind of the thrill, is all your games have those moments, even if it's not, it's not like, everything's nicely tied up in a bow, but it seems like, a highlight of all of your games is having that moment of like, aha, okay, here's what's happening in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, I know that like when we made Silent Hill Shattered Memories, that whole game was designed around having a big reveal that shifted your perspective and provided some emotional catharsis, and like everything in the theme and emotions of that game was tied up in that. And then I guess, in making that, like when we made the decision, like, oh, this game is going to be about this unreliable narrator and this twist, I did a lot of research, and some of it was like rereading books that I had loved previously that had made me want to tell that kind of story, but like a lot of thinking about the role of a twist, right, and a reveal. I wrote like a little column for Edge about this, where like the hard thing when you're in that space, especially if you're dealing with higher ups, is sometimes people assume the value of a twist or reveal is purely like the violence of the reveal, right? Like, whoa, what the hell? Like, they'll be like, oh, that's a great twist because like no one saw it coming. And I remember a lot of my job on Shattered Memories was educating those people that actually those are bad twists. Like a good twist is one that, like, the only real way to assess the quality, in my opinion, of a twist is like, is the story that is revealed by the twist more interesting than the one before, right? Like if the twist takes you to a place that makes less sense, or is more wacky or whatever, it's less good. And then like the part of the art of the twist is setting it up, and especially when you think about murder mysteries, like setting it up so that when it's revealed, it makes sense. Because otherwise, all of the catharsis and kind of emotion in that moment will be lost because people will be too busy going, wait a minute, wait, what? Why? Who is this guy? How's this person involved? So I remember we had this whole thing on Shattered Memories where the whole game was set up to foreshadow, anticipate the reveal we had. And the publishers would be like, well, isn't there a chance that you'll like spoil the surprise? And it was like, no, like the spoiling would be if someone gets to this big emotional moment and is confused, right? And the art is like the best twists are the ones where you figure it out a third of the way in, but then convince yourself you're wrong or dismiss it. Right. There was a great one, like the first season of The Killing, like the Scandinavian Killing, million red herrings in that show, but almost like episode 1, you're like, that's the guy. 100%, this is the guy that did the killing. And then a few episodes in, the detective figures it out. So, the first few episodes, you're screaming at the screen to the detective, like, it's him, stop being so stupid. The detective comes around, it's like, oh, it's probably this guy. They drag him in, a few episodes later, interrogate him, and it turns out they have some alibi or there's some reason. And so now suddenly the detective feels stupid and looks bad. You like have this guilt connect because you've been willing this thing, and they made you feel sad for the character. They're like, oh, right. Well, no, actually, no, this character's, I thought they were an evil murderer. They're actually this lovely person. Now I feel really bad. And then like another 10 episodes later, they reveal, no, you're right. It was this guy, right? But so you've kind of done all the justification and you've kind of had this emotional roller coaster. But yeah, for me, like that's like the twist is, or the reveal is a useful structure in telling a story that has these multiple layers, right? Where you're starting here and you're revealing more and more layers to create something that is more complicated. But you need to take the player through those layers to build up their emotional involvement. I did a talk about her story, I think, at GDC, where I talked about like the twist as well. Like if you are immersed in something, the twist, rather than like kicking you out, right? You're immersed and you're thinking, this is how the world works. This is what the characters are doing. This is why things are happening. And then you realize, oh crap, I had it wrong. Like there's a mechanic there where your kind of suspension of disbelief to maintain that, you almost kind of like double down on this new version of reality, and this kind of reboot of your simulation of things kind of gives you this stronger, deeper connection to it. So there is definitely, like, I think for me, it's about, and you know, and the extent to which things like Immortality and Her Story are these kind of exploratory archival stories. It is like figuring out ways to, you know, if you just dumped everything on the player at the start, it wouldn't mean anything and it would be too much. So it's like letting them slowly kind of dig into this thing. And I think those, you know, the fun thing with the level of randomness or nonlinearity in these games is that sometimes those kind of aha moments happen in different places.
Right.
And sometimes they are player prompted, right? Like the player is there going, wait a minute, could this be? And then they like have some plan to test or prove out this theory. And then they like, oh, yes. Oh my God. And then they like bought in twice as much because they've kind of floated this idea.
Yeah. I was actually going to ask because Pentiment is structured very like, you know, it's there's some variability, but you always come back to the same points, and each person's playthrough is probably going to be more or less the same. And you might miss a few characters here and there, but like, you know, the build up to the end of Act 2 is like a very sort of traditional kind of build up and release and everything. But when I was playing Immortality, I was like, man, like the structure of this and the fact that you can encounter these things and not just individual points, but individual points and individual stories is so, well, it's not random. It is driven to a certain extent, but like I figured out the kind of basics and, you know, thinking as a dev, I'm like, okay, so this is how this works. This is how this is interconnected. But I was wondering the extent to which, how do you balance that level of randomness with like, well, we really want to make sure we get these kind of key points across. Like, what's that balance there between we need to tell this or we feel it's very important to structure this versus we're okay just being like, and if they don't get any of the rest, that's totally fine.
I think there's like, I mean, on one hand, there's in handing a degree of control to the player, there is a reliance on the player self-pacing or even like self-assembling a story, right? I remember there was I can't remember who this was, and I'm always quoting them, so I should look it up. But there was a screenwriter who was, this was back when television was live. It was like, you know, it was a thing that if you missed the 8 o'clock show, you'd miss it, right? And he was referencing the fact, like he was trying to encourage writers to cut out the crap bits, like to get rid of the 20 minutes of preamble and just get into the meat of your story. And their point was, how often have you tuned into a TV show, 20 minutes in, 30 minutes, and within 30 seconds, you know what's happening, right? Like, and you know who the baddies are and the goodies are, and you kind of like, there is an element to which stories, somewhat like a hologram, right? They kind of contain all the elements. So there's an element of leaning into our ability to make stories out of things, to connect the dots, to, you know, jigsaw puzzle this thing. But then the other thing we do, which we've developed over the last few games, is a kind of structural way of designing things, which on a level is reasonably simple in that, you know, we know that this story is composed of all these atomic pieces, right? So in the case of Immortality, it's a few hundred pieces of film. And so we have like a giant spreadsheet, and the goal in initially outlining is every single atomic piece should have, we have like a bunch of columns, and it should have something for each column. So in the case of Immortality, it would be a case of, you know, a piece of film will have a piece of plot from the fictional movie. It will have a beat or a piece of information that relates to what is going on in Marissa's story, right? So, for example, like the beginning of Ambrosio, the question is, will this naive young actress be able to give the director Fisher what he wants? And that covers like, I don't know how many scenes. So that is like the question of the story at that moment. There will be like themes that are being tracked across the whole piece. and it'll be like each scene should have something which addresses this theme. So you basically go through it, and in each atomic piece, you have to tick off that says it's doing all of these things. So that then if the player watches this clip and then they jump to this clip, they can create a meaningful through line, which might be, oh, we're mapping the story of Marissa Marcel, right? We're seeing that, oh, in this scene, she's really young and naive, and the director's pissed off with her. And then in this scene, oh, suddenly now, like, she's taking control and she's giving direction and she's taken on too much of the character, whatever. Oh, now this is telling the story of Marissa Marcel. Or it might be like, oh, I'm really interested in what is happening with the actor playing Ambrosio. Or it might be, I'm interested in what this game is telling me about the art of filmmaking. So each scene has at least a specific instance of, here is a piece of how films are made that you might not have known. Oh, in this scene, you're going to see that for a macro shot, they use a clothespin, right? In this scene, you're going to see that sometimes they do tails where they hold the thing upside down because they're doing the clapperboard at the end of it. Oh, here's the thing where you see how such and such a shot is pulled off, right? Like, so you basically, there's a simple rigor to it of making sure that every scene is doing a bit of everything. So then you kind of have the confidence that even if someone would just sat and randomly absorbed clips entirely randomly, like there would be enough connectivity and enough ways to link these things. So it's not as simple as it being a jigsaw puzzle where there's one way of arranging it. It's a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces can connect to other pieces in interesting ways. And, you know, and then we'll like run bits of math on everything. So it's more obvious in something like Her Story where the navigation was by words. We would literally plug in the script and it would run the math and tell us how connected certain clips were. It'd be like, oh, scene 266 is really hard to find because the words that are being used in it have been used up by other clips. So then I'd go in and I'd rewrite it. So it'd be like, well, this clip should be easy to find because they're talking about marriage and that's like this huge theme in Her Story. And then I'd be like, oh, but the word wedding and the word marriage have already been used by a ton of other clips. So then you'd pull up all the clips that use the word wedding and be like, actually, let's remove it from that scene and remove it from that scene. And now we have this cute little set that's almost this kind of poetic discussion of the theme of weddings, right? And then with Immortality, we had a system that we would plug in the script and it would extract from the script which characters are in this scene. Any objects that were called out in the action lines would be extracted. So we would know there is a dagger, a snake, whatever in this scene. And then it used that to create a kind of connectivity graph of like, oh, these scenes are hard to find. So we try and kind of get a balance. Immortality is interestingly different because with Her Story and Telling Lies, because it's deterministic what will happen if you search for a certain word. Like those, you know, if you typed murder in Her Story, everyone would get the same response. And the player then has some choice as to which clip to then watch. So we could 100% graph like the difficulty. And with Her Story, which was more of a mystery, it was such that the later bits of story content chronologically, which had more of the meat and the reveals, it almost got like exponentially harder to find those. So there was statistically, we knew it was harder to get to the good stuff.
Yeah.
Of course, you could, in theory, have pulled those clips up in your first move. but statistically, across the course of a game, we knew that this would be more. With Telling Lies, where we wanted more of this Nick Rogue thing of jumping back and forth in the chronology of a relationship, it was more of a flat curve. It was not kind of as exponential.
Right.
But yeah, so there's, you know, it's almost like I always relate things to open world games and, you know, like the something like Zelda Breath of the Wild is one of the few games where I played it and I was like, I just connect to the feel of what they're doing here in terms of there's this big open world to explore. You can genuinely go where the fuck you want. Nintendo means that. It's not just like an empty promise. And the moment-to-moment exploration is interesting. If you see a tree up on this mountain and climb up there, you're going to find something that's kind of cool and beautiful. It's not just junior level designer placing pickups, right? Like everything felt slightly handcrafted and interesting. So that even if you missed whole swathes of that game, the stuff you were finding was cool. And the stress you felt from the freedom was offset by the generosity of Nintendo in just constantly giving you cool shit and genuinely wanting you to follow your curiosity and explore stuff. So we like, that's in my mind how we balance it, is like, these games are somewhat opaque in that we're like, hey, go at it. Like, we're not going to tell you too much about what's happening. Yeah. You're going to be very confused early on. So like, that's a big challenge to the player. But at the same time, there's no bottlenecking. There's no kind of gameplay skill challenge. So there is a generosity and a freedom of movement that I think kind of offsets it, right? So, and then, you know, with Immortality, because we have this match cut mechanic, like the thing I was really interested to explore was an element of randomness. Was, you know, if you make a classic RPG, we know that like RNG is like the heart of those games, right? There is that sense of, you know, in a loot-based game, like the randomness provides, even though all that loot is generic bullshit, like there is a sense of excitement about getting the Crimson Scepter of whatever in a random loot drop, because you feel the excitement and surprise of it. So there's like lots of interesting uses of like randomness in normal video games. And what I was interested in here was like injecting some of that in a narrative game. And it was like an interesting balance, because again, to compensate, we're giving you this incredible degree of expressivity and control in that you can click on anything in this scene and you'll get a match cut. Like that was like the big technical challenge for this game. So you have a tremendous amount of expressivity and control. Well, I think this is interesting. I want to click on Carl Goodman here. I want to click on this little prop. I want to click on this apple. I'm going to do this thing. But then in return, it's like playing consequences or something, right? The game is then like, well, I'm now going to show you something, and it might surprise you. It might be not where you're expecting to go, but you know, that for me was really interesting, because so much other storytelling in media like has that sense of everything being static and controlled. You know, if I think of like more avant-garde literature that has inspired me over the years, you know, reading like J.G. Ballard's Atrocity Exhibition, where it's like, oh, this is, you can read this in any order, you can jump in and out. At the end of the day, it's still a book printed on paper, and I can just sit and read it from beginning to end, right? Like, so that sense of weirdness and surpriseness in it is kind of limited by it being so fixed. So I think when you get to like games and digital, like re-injecting that, you know, is kind of fun.
Yeah.
So that's how we kind of balance it all. Whereas I imagine with something like Pentiment, like I almost did like a big choose your own adventure style novel thing for Choice of Games. You make these kind of cool kind of interactive fiction novels, and they have this cool system. And I've seen some of the things Inkle have done where when you get to the degree of choice, it almost becomes impossible to figure out like how many different ways there are of playing the game, right? And you sometimes have automated things that will like spit out 100 different varied playthroughs and things. But do you like, are you working on a kind of scene by scene basis, or do you have to step back and worry about those kind of alternate paths?
I think that with Pentiment structure, it's we have this concept called time boxing, which is not used correctly. But the way that when we talk about time boxing, it was to say there are events that you will do that will advance time, and there are meals, and then there are, we call them TBEs, the time boxed events. And that would be something like the autopsy, which is not really an autopsy, but whatever. The examination of the body, the widow's chores, digging up the grave, or sneaking into the library. All those things are time boxed events. Some of them are time sensitive, but they all advance time. And whenever we did those, it was always, there's going to be key suspect information and motives and backstory that will come in all of them. And in some cases, you will get it handed to you, but you can still miss it. So, for example, the Golden Hand sequence in Act 2, where you can go and pay for a round of drinks, and you get to talk to the Landsknecht, the Italian doctors, the pilgrims, and there are a bunch of clues in there, and you can kind of just beef them all. Like you can get them and then kind of miss them. And the important thing was to structure it in a way where it really did feel like it was progressing things and you were at least coming close or contextualizing. And so with each of those events, it had to have that feeling. So the player wasn't just like, well, that was a huge waste of time. They might come away from it going like, I don't know really what to do with this yet. But that was very important. And then everything else that was outside of that was really just, I'm not going to say fluff, but it was supplemental. So, there is a person you can accuse in Act 2. I don't want to spoil things too much, but there's a person you can accuse in Act 2. And one of the things that I found very striking in a good way that I'm delighted by is a lot of people completely miss the suspect entirely. Like I've watched their playthroughs where they get handed piece of evidence after piece of evidence, and they don't put them together and they don't like talk to people to connect the dots. And they get to the end of the act, and this character, they never learn that they're a suspect. They never learn that there's a secret that they're hiding. And even though they literally came across like 5 or 6 potential instances where they could have gotten that information, and they sense it, they're like, there's something going on here, but I don't know what it is. Some people, that character avoids suspicion entirely, which I think is, I was delighted when I saw people just kind of completely glide over it. But it's good though, because there's always somebody. There's always at least one person, and most people will have multiple people to accuse. And really at that point, it's about what do you know and how have you contextualized that? So there's actually the person I'm sorry, I'm being very vague about this just in case anyone is playing it, but there's a character in Act 2 where you find out that they're doing something secret, and then the other pieces of information can include they killed someone previously. You're like, oh, wow. Then you can learn that they're very remorseful about it. You're like, okay. Then you can learn, like, there's all these like layers of things that you can learn, and like how the people around them who know about it but are okay with it. And all those things can contextualize how you feel about this person as a suspect. And if you don't get all those layers, you might just be like, they suck. Or you might be like, no, they seem totally chill and cool, and I don't think it's a big deal. And then if you say, did you know that they killed someone like before? And you're like, oh, what? Oh, they did? Well, I don't know. And it's those contextualizations that I think are interesting, and they give more variability to individual playthroughs. And, because really what we're asking players at the end of the 2 acts is, who are you willing to send to their death? And it's not even who do you think is guilty or who do you think deserves it. It's who do you think should die? And it's put to you kind of plainly, that's what's going to happen no matter what. And I think my goal with that level of interactivity, just as with faction choices in something like Deadfire or Fallout, is to make the person kind of reflect and go like, okay, this isn't actually easy. This kind of sucks. And I have to really think about what I value and what I think is important for this community and how I want people, and knowing that you're going to stay in that community and people are going to think things about you and say things to you about the things that you've done. And so it's a way to make the player reflect and say, like, what do I value and what do I think is actually a good or the best of these bad outcomes? So I'm okay with people missing things and kind of going like, oh man, if I had known that, I think I would have made a different decision, because again, it's making them analyze their own thought process.
I think as well, like the level of redundancy is super important. Like I think that's another thing throughout the detective games that I don't like is if there are 5 pieces of evidence and you have to find all 5, right? And then, or in more of a traditional kind of point and click game, I hate lawnmowering dialogue, right? I hate knowing, okay, I'm going to go speak to this character. I have to click on everything and I'll get every piece of information. Then the story will progress. I think there's like a point early on in Pentiment where I realized there was that sense of like, you only get so many actions, right? Or you can only do so many things, which suddenly was extremely freeing because it flips it and it says, actually, it's about what you think is important. It's about what you want to go and spend your time doing, right? Like you're not going to 100% this game. It's kind of cool, actually. I don't know if this was intended, but like, because I went into Pentiment like reasonably not knowing too much about the game, start playing it. That first moment when I was dropped into the village, I was so overwhelmed. I was like, holy shit, this is like some kind of Shenmue, like village. There's so many people and houses, and they're all like there. It's like this complicated simulation. Like, oh my God, like, but a good thing about that sense of being overwhelmed, similarly to like being dropped into Zelda or something, is like, I now have a comfort level of knowing there's just like so much going on that I'm shifting from that perspective of like 100%ing it, of doing everything, to now just actually I'm going to be motivated by who do I want to go and talk to? Like, right. Who's going to be more interesting? But yeah, that, when you have that level of redundancy in, in a detective game, it suddenly feels like a much more interesting setup, because you're not just following the designer's trails, right? And I think as a writer, like when I have done things that are more kind of choice-based, having systems that are more modular, where I can just kind of create interesting mini variations. And I think there's something I thought about a lot when I was playing Disco Elysium, because like Disco Elysium, maybe even more so than your game, like looking at it from a certain angle, you're like, this is a very clever way to dress up interactive fiction, right? To play Disco Elysium, 90% of my playtime is sat reading text, clicking text options, reading text, clicking text options, right? But it's from a distance, it looks like you're playing a third-person RPG, the isometric RPG game, right? Where you're exploring and it's atmosphere and discovery and you're moving through space. But really, like, the core of it is that text story content. And to some extent, similarly, the same is true of Pentiment. But in both games, there's something like, what do you get out of the world? Obviously, there's the immersion and the atmosphere and all those things, but it's a neat way of organizing a story that has a lot, right? Like there's all this story going on, and having people geographically stuck in places, knowing that this is these people's houses, this is where all the monks live. Like, it's a neat way of storing all this story content and giving you a way to then kind of navigate it. I really liked, I don't think I'll ever get to do this, but like, I loved the game Killer 7. And what I loved about that game was you had Shinji Mikami, who had made all the Resident Evil games. He had Suda51 being a bit punk. But that game felt like, especially Mikami, coming from having made Resident Evil 100 times, being like, in those games, you have full three-dimensional movement, essentially. But all you're really doing is either moving down a corridor or moving from door to door, right? And you spend half your time looking at the map, deciding where to go. So with Killer 7, they went, you don't need full three-dimensional control of your character. Like, if you're in a corridor, you can run down the corridor or you can run back up the corridor. And it allows us to make your running look really cool, because you can't do the annoying stuff people can do in third-person games. It simplifies the controls to some extent. But when I played that game, like as a player, I really appreciated the extent to which it gave me more brain time to just appreciate everything else. And I think this, and when I played Pentiment, I was like, oh, we're essentially running along splines. And every now and then I get to do like a Castlevania, go up the stairs, and like my gamer brain is like, this is like Castlevania. But it's quite, on one level, it's a trivial thing, but I don't think I think when I like explain to people about traditional video game stories, I'm like, there is this huge problem that you have in video games where if I'm playing Halo, I got my hand on two sticks, a bunch of buttons. I'm looking at a 2D screen that's representing a 3D space. I'm prioritizing targets. Who am I going to shoot at next? Which gun am I going to choose? Do I need to hit some cover? What's my larger objective in this battle? Like, so much is going on. And that's using up, I don't know, let's say it's using up 50% of my brain just to process all that information and think about it and send the messages to my fingers to do the thing and move the camera and shoot the gun. That if I'm also playing with story and characters and ideas, I have so much less brain to be thinking about the story, right? And what you realize as a writer is most story is happening in your imagination, right? It's not the pictures in a graphic novel. It's not the footage on screen. If I'm watching a movie, the story isn't the footage on screen. It's me thinking, what's going to happen next? Oh, this guy is heading back to argue with his boss because he's furious, and that could go terrible for him because he doesn't realize, blah, blah. Like, you are running the story in your head. You're simulating it in your head. And so much of games robs us of that freedom to be running that in our head. And so playing Pentiment, and you have that slightly simplified movement system, and you do have, like, you have downtime of, oh, I need to run back to the monastery. That's going to take me like 30 seconds to run across this same screen that I've been across like 20 times. But that gives you the room to actually be thinking, right? And processing things, and actually then the story becomes much more interesting. And was that simplicity of the kind of movement system sort of locked in early on with the art style?
Yeah, it was debated, but I was pretty insistent on it because I'd played Night in the Woods, which was one of the primary inspiration points for just the overall like structure of the game. And I was struck with Night in the Woods. Night in the Woods had platforming, but it was pretty light. I knew we weren't going to have Andreas jumping around and platforming, but May moves on a track basically, and we do splits which are different. But then I also played Mutazione, and Mutazione allows you to do a little more exploration within the scene. And it complicated the scheme. For them, it made sense because you're like looking for things. And I was just like, I don't think we're going to have that type of gameplay in our game. And it really complicates a lot of things. It complicates the animation graph. It complicates how we lay the scenes out. It looks cool in Mutazione and it works for that game. But I was like, for what we're doing, I was just like, what does it give to the player other than like, well, I can move around however I want? I'm like, so what? There's no gameplay there. And yeah, sometimes depending on what you're trying to evoke, experientially, that's worthwhile. But for me, I said, look, it's going to make all of our lives a lot easier if we just restrict this to tracks. And there was a little bit of fussing. And then, we prototyped it out and we realized, yeah, we're going to have to do some special up and down animations for Andreas. But other characters are pretty much never going to do that outside of like Lawrence Rothvogel and a few other people. So it really made things simple. Like when you come into a scene, characters kind of are standing around and you're moving on a track and you can come up to them and talk to them off the track. And we do a very, I think again, Mutazione, they're just like fade to black, fade in, you're there. Like there's no getting into position. We just move the character. And so again, it was choices like that where we said, is it really that important to naturally transition the characters into a speaking formation? Or do we just want to fade to black every time and make it really easy on ourselves and focus on other things? And movement was the same thing where we're like, look, we would really complicate a lot of things for ourselves and not really give the player very much more in terms of something to play with. So let's just not do it. But yeah, that was a very early thing. And I'm very glad we made that decision because in the end, it dramatically simplified how we set up scenes for navigation.
Yeah. Josh, are you still in a phase of kind of basking in the success of Pentiment, or where are you at creatively at this point in your career?
I mean, I'm glad it was well received. I'm glad I'm going to go to the BAFTAs. That'll be fun.
Hey, look at that.
But right now I'm studio design director at Obsidian, so I'm just helping out on other projects, and I have some time, some variable amount of time to figure out what I'm going to do next. And I don't know if it's going to be small or mid-size or big, but I think going back to what I said much, much earlier, like as long as I'm super stoked about it and I have a core of people who can get super stoked about it, because to be frank, Pentiment, I couldn't have, like, we always say this stuff, but like when I came to Hannah Kennedy, my art director, with the idea for it, if she wasn't on board with it, I literally would have just abandoned it because she's the only person that I really thought could do it. But I got to find people that are as jazzed about it as I am, at least the core, because as I said, the bigger the team gets, the harder it is to get everyone to be super stoked about it. But yeah, I have some time, thankfully, to think about it. But yeah, that's where I am.
Yeah, that's nice. Are you extra tempted to dive into Avowed just because you have the connection to that world? Is it something you're focusing on more than most?
I mean, like I said, I'm the studio design director, so wherever I am needed and wanted, I will help out. But we have Grounded, which I'm only a little, because that's live now, and they're doing ongoing support. And then we have Avowed and Outer Worlds 2, and so I help out on those. But it's purely grandpa advising. They're not my projects, so I just kind of say, take this or leave it.
Yeah, yeah. Sam, is that what you aspire to in your career, to get to grandpa advising level?
I don't know. I would love, it sounds nice, but I always have to be in the weeds. Like that's the thing I've been trying to figure out, like since going indie, like the big challenge from the boring business side is like, can you get to the point where you're not just like going project to project and you have like a little bit of security or momentum, right? And usually that is the transition from being a one project at a time team to being able to actually have a couple of things going on at once. So it does help ride some of those waves. But the tricky thing there is like figuring out a way of doing that where I can come in and have opinions. So, I don't know. Even having a goal outside of like, we did it. We shipped the game and people liked it and we didn't lose any money, like that, that still feels like a very good outcome. Yeah. When you look around and see what's going on.
Yeah, for sure.
With other teams, and like, if you see a game that comes out and you think like, oh wow, that was a really cool game. That was really neat. And then you realize no one played it, or like it just, didn't, that's horrific. I feel so much like sadness for those devs. So being in a position, like even back to what Josh was saying about, Game Pass people maybe not even needing Pentiment to like be a huge hit, right? In the same way, like I've somehow maneuvered into this position of like, I remember when we pitched Immortality to some of the platforms, I kind of went into that being like, this is such a weird thing. Like, we'll see what people say, but this is going to be really weird. And everyone loved it in a way that was surprising to me. But then you realize, like, if you're in this platformy, Netflixy world, like they want the range, right? So they're going to have a pixel roguelike. They're going to have a first-person shooter. They know they've got Halo and Forza and everything else coming along. So being able to go, here is this weird-ass Sam Barlow game about these 3 movies that looks, some people are going to love this, some people are going to hate it. Like, that is always useful to them. Yeah. To, like, have that thing to slot in. Because there are not as many things that are as, weird and wonderful as something like Immortality and Pentiment. So, it's a somewhat privileged position to have got to this point of, being able to start conversations with people and then be like, oh, cool, yeah, we'll take the cool weird thing you're doing, unless it's going to cost us like $1 million, $100 million. $1 million is not too bad. When I was a kid, $1 million was a lot of money. That's right. And then I started making video games. But yeah, as long as I'm not asking for 100 million. But yeah, I mean, talking about some of these things with Josh has been interesting because we're like kicking off Touch Wood, a new project which is a lot more ambitious and has some traditional gameplay aspects, aesthetics, features. And so all those questions of like navigation, fidelity of the navigation, like, is it important to be able to do all the things that people might want to do, right? And I think there's obviously, I think there's a budget level where you have to just do all that right? Because you don't have a good answer when the exec says, why are you not putting yellow paint on all of your interactive objects? And you're like, because it looks disgusting. And they're like, yeah, well, if Uncharted can do it, if Resident Evil can do it, like you should be doing it. Like there's that, I don't know. I have this, like at the end of every year, usually I'm usually in like one jury or another. And so I'll get like all the game codes. And obviously like the last few years I've been in the luxury of being in like indie world. But that's the point where I'll sit down, I'll end up like playing all the AAA games that came out that year. And I usually get so like riled up at some of the things that have just become de facto standards, right? And the slow pace of innovation, which is, inevitable when games take 5 years to make and cost $100 million of people's money. But so yeah, in this interesting space of like knowing that like making Immortality, there is a level of luxury to that, of getting to work in live action, of the structure of it, meaning that we have this real low burn rate for a lot of the development. Having that gives us like a level of control, knowing that we're going in with like this very deliberately kind of minimalist gameplay, so that you can really put a lot of the depth in the content, which is in itself challenging, but
but for the new project,
so now starting to kind of wrestle with of where exactly to draw the line. Like I say, I think I would, if it didn't have to make its money back, I would love to just put like a Killer 7 control scheme in there, because I love that thing. It was great. You just like press the big green button and the guy ran.
That's it, man.
That was it, right? And then you got to a door and you went through, and then you shot people and had weird things happen. But
that's the dream of all games. Awesome. Well, hey, Josh and Sam, I can't thank you enough for making this happen. Really appreciate it. And hats off, obviously, to the entire team that for both of your studios that put these games together, because hell of a job. Well done.
Thank you very much
for everybody.
Thank you.
Well done.
Yeah.
I enjoyed myself a lot. And then we didn't really even talk much about like the art style and just how, and the fonts and all that beautiful stuff that you did. It's kind of obvious.
Endless hours of discussion. Yeah.
You solved, we kind of dug into this problem of, like monks not looking very cool. When there have been films, about monks and stuff. And like when we were adapting Ambrosio, which was, something of like, it's essentially a film noir story, right? And the main character of the main monk in the original novel is supposed to be kind of like this rock star monk that everyone loves, and all the women in Madrid want to sleep with him. And we looked at, there have been like a couple of other adaptations of the monk. Then there's like a bad one from like the 60s or 70s, and it's Franco Nero, who played Jesus a couple of times. He's in it.
Oh yeah,
so he's like a very sexy Jesus monk.
I like Franco Nero.
There was a BBC adaptation with Paul McGann, where they actually tried to do it realistic. So they were like, well, this is the hairstyle a Capuchin monk would have had. And so this whole like erotic thriller vibe is happening whilst Paul McGann has a bald head with like the little, there's the strip of hair around. And it's like, that's like the least sexy hairdo. And I was like, we're not doing that. I'm like, okay, we're gonna go Jesus monk. We're gonna do like sexy monk, because it's, this is being filmed in the 60s, whatever. And they, hairstyles are always, if you're looking at like sci-fi or historical drama, you can always pin exactly when it was filmed.
Oh yeah.
Because the haircuts, you're like, yeah, this is supposed to be, the 1400s, but that is a 1973 haircut right there. Right?
I liked that with Name of the Rose, the adaptation that Jean-Jacques Hano did. He cast Christian Slater, who was like 18 years old. So it's like, it doesn't matter that he has a tonsure. And then he has Sean Connery, but then all the other monks, other than like Michael Lonsdale, basically, were specifically cast to be really weird looking. And he said, there was some quote where he said, like, I wanted them to look as weird as the men I knew in my hometown in rural France. And then he went back to his hometown, and the guys were like, whoa. He's like, do you really think that we look that ugly? And he's like, no, you're uglier.
Oh boy. That's like when my mum hears me doing a podcast and I'll say something about my childhood, and then I'll get a text 5 minutes later like, nomadic? Did we have a nomadic childhood? And I'll be like,
it could be worse. Nomadic. That's fine.
Yeah.
All right. But hey, thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate it. And thank you so much to everybody for watching or listening to this interview from MinnMax. There are many more like it in this very playlist. So if you enjoyed it, you can always subscribe to MinnMax's YouTube channel. We'd appreciate it, or help support it directly over at Patreon, patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see ya. Bye. You've seen the headlines. You know that the media landscape is consolidating. Having truly independent games media is more important than ever. MinnMax can exist independently as a place about games, friends, and getting better, but we need your help. The good news is that it's easy. Just click on that subscribe button or unlock a mountain of benefits by going to patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Thanks so much, everybody.